Welcome, folks, to another episode that is episode 3 of the Scrum Call. This is a podcast which is geared towards those who are interested to know, learn, or just have a reference material available in the form of a podcast all about Agile Scrum framework. Now, what did we cover last time? We basically covered the fundamentals of demystifying or understanding in very simple terms what Agile Scrum is all about. We touched upon another methodology called Waterfall as well. What are we going to do today? Today, we are going to be covering what is Waterfall all about. There are no blockers. Now, it is important to first and foremost understand what is Waterfall before we even start thinking about Agile Scrum. And the reason is very simple. Agile Scrum is relatively a new methodology, whereas Waterfall has been around for a while now. So it makes sense to understand what were the pitfalls or what was it that was lacking in the Waterfall method, because of which something like Agile came forward and is now being adopted by several companies. That is what this episode is all about. And I will delve a little more into Waterfall this time. So now, Waterfall. As the name suggests, it's like waterfalling from a particular platform. Whereas in this methodology, there are multiple platforms. Now, I will tell you exactly what are those platforms, right? So you have a phase where you gather requirements. You will decide what needs to be done, what are we trying to achieve, the objectives, the benefits, the risks, overall, what is this project going to achieve in the form of long-term, short-term benefits, hard benefits, soft benefits, and whatnot. Your project plan will start off typically from here. Now, in the requirement phase, you will start talking about, okay, what do we need to build? Are we building an e-commerce website, for example? Should it have a login page? Should the login credentials be encrypted? What kind of encryption needs to be done? Those kind of requirements. Then comes your design phase. That's a phase where you start, thinking about the architecture. Like, are we going to do this on the cloud? Are we going to do this on, a server farm? Will this be a standalone server? Will this be on the app? Your architecture, your overall look and feel of the overall application from a bare bones level, like, from a very, at a level where you really still can't see the software actually. You're still discussing the nuts and bolts of it, right? So that's another phase. That will only come once your requirements are clear. It is approved, which means you actually spend time in just figuring out requirements. After that, you move into your design phase, where you talk about, okay, so requirements says that there should be a mobile app. So let's start talking on those lines. Once your design phase is done and dusted, then you will proceed to the implementation phase. Implementation phase is where you start actually writing code, which means in the first two phases, which could be months or weeks, you have not written a single line of code. Now is when you actually start writing code. Your UI UX design also should have been ready by now, right? You start writing your code. Now you have developed the entire software, it's in place, everything is coded up and ready. Is when you move to the next phase, which is your verification phase. Meaning you will now sit and do a QA. You will test the software. Is it even working? Is it working on Android only? Let's say this is an application supposed to work on Android and iOS, right? So you will now start testing in both the mobile phones to see if it is functioning properly or not. Obviously, humans being humans, we make a lot of mistakes, and it's natural, it is expected. So a lot of bugs and issues will come which needs to be resolved. So you'll start doing that now. After which comes your maintenance phase. Assuming all your bugs and everything is fixed in the verification phase itself, you will deploy it, you will install it, you will go live in production, and now you're maintaining it. So production issues, for example, any change requests, those kind of things is when you start doing in that particular maintenance stage. Lights on, like we say, right? So if you notice, every stage is given its due time and importance. You don't move to the next stage until the first stage or second stage is done. You can't jump to the verification stage, which is your fourth stage here, right from your requirement stage itself. You can't do that. You can't even, for that matter, go from requirements to implementation stage. You can't even do that because design stage comes in between. You can't skip that, right? So that is how waterfall works. Now the pitfall in this method is that I took the example of iOS and Android, right? We know how often mobile phones change, how often Android and iOS also keep updating themselves. Let's say we took a year to build this application, right? By that time iOS updates itself. Turns out the security system has been enhanced. Instead of a 128-bit, they are using a much higher bit depth of encryption, whereas your software can only work with 128-bit. Now what do you do, right? For keeping things simple, let's say we started our requirement stage in January and we are going to end, or we are going to come to maintenance stage by December, right? And by say October, iOS has updated itself. By October, typically we should be somewhere around the verification stage, somewhere around that. And we realize that, hey, this is not going to work on any latest Apple phone, for example. Now what do? It will only work on the older ones, which now means two things: abandon the project or restart the requirement phase once again all over and start making it available for the higher bit encryption, which now means that you're playing catch up. It's a game of where you're trying to ensure that you're up to date. But how can you be up to date when you're spending so much time in every single stage? You're getting my point here. And that is the biggest pitfall of waterfall. The feedback mechanism is too late. It's not enough time to react. In today's competitive scenario, where technology changes so rapidly, new frameworks, new applications are out at the snap of two fingers. How can you expect to stay ahead of your competitors with such a methodology? Now, I'm not saying that waterfall is completely trash. It might seem like that as I'm saying it, but I'm not saying it is completely trash. There are implementations where waterfall makes more sense than agile, right? But by and large, agile makes a lot of sense. And the reason behind that is very simple. I told you about 5 stages. These 5 stages come together, as one in every single sprint. And in agile, a sprint can be anywhere from 2 weeks to a month's time, depending on your conversation with the team and what makes more sense and what not. You can decide what your sprint length needs to be. 2 is typically ideal. I have always done 2-week sprints in all my career till now. And that is where you don't need to wait for the customer or for you to even start off with all the requirements. We know at a very basic level that, hey, okay, they need e-commerce website, which should be essentially a mobile website. This much, there will be certain commonalities in this thing. You can start off with that. It could be like a prototype. Now, to put it in perspective, if let's say there are 2 teams running in parallel, one following waterfall, one following agile. In the waterfall, and again 1 year's duration, like we took in the previous example, let's say the requirement itself takes a month's time. In 1 month, waterfall team has only figured out all of its requirements. Whereas the agile team, what it will do is, in the first sprint itself, it will take the bare minimum requirements, and it will say, okay, let me start off with the login page. And it starts off with developing the login page. By the end of 2 weeks, it will actually have a login page functionally ready to work on. This could be even like a prototype to see, okay, we are talking about a higher bit encryption system. Let's start off with that itself. At least it will be able to demonstrate itself. The team will be able to show you that, hey, this is what our page looks like, right? And by the end of 1 month, assuming there are just 4 weeks in that month, by the end of 2 sprints, the agile team will be able to demonstrate some kind of working software, whereas a waterfall team has still no software to their name yet. They only can say, okay, we know everything that the customer wants, which again is a fallacy, because what if the customer wanted something, that technology changed and now that requirement is irrelevant, right? And that is where Agile will be able to fine tune itself in the sprint of the Feb month. January we started off, right? So 2 sprints in January, 3rd sprint in February. Now, if you're wondering what is sprint and all, I will go into those details too. But just to create an example here. So I hope that kind of clarifies where Agile actually wins and why it makes so much sense as compared to waterfall. And you really can't jump into certain things without understanding a bit of background. So this is that background that I wanted to provide you. So in the next one, we'll cover more topics. So stay tuned. This is Shishir signing off.